So I'm really pleased to be joined today by Ellis, Mhairi and Flora Bhattachary, and we're going to be exploring their work and how that is influenced by their personal histories. So Ellis, would you like to introduce yourself and your practice?
Sure. So my name is Ellis and I'm a fine jeweller. I specialise in sculptural fine jewellery inspired by my Scottish heritage.
Thank you, Ellis. And Flora?
I'm Flora Bhattachary, and I'm a jeweller working at the Goldsmiths Centre, and I specialise in bold sculptural pieces.
So you've come together, both exhibitors, in the Digital Goldsmiths Fair this year, and your work is both influenced by your personal backgrounds, although quite different personal backgrounds. Could you say, Flora, a little bit about how that background has influenced what you do and the work and collections that you produce?
Yeah, so my practice is really based around my experiences as a child in India. And I very much draw on my hippie upbringing and mix that together with contemporary cultural references as well. So I will draw from Indian mythology, but then mix it with, say, disco or contemporary house music. So if you look at my mood boards, it's a real mix of references included in there. But my experiences as a child were really formative in developing my aesthetic. So I think that I always come back to that idyllic period in my childhood, and it really formed a love of pattern and colour and repetition. So that is the core of my design.
And are there particular crafts or textures or materials that you sort of are evoked by that childhood? And I'm intrigued by you calling it a hippie upbringing. When you say hippie upbringing, what do you mean by that? What's in your mind's eye when you visualise that time?
Well, we travelled overland in a VW van in the most hippie way you could in the early 70s to India. And then stayed there and stayed with friends in various different places and travelled around and were there, So it was arch hippiedom. And that really formed a kind of, a love of pattern and colour in me, I think, from an earlier stage. I think experiences that you have when you're very young really stick with you. And that it almost develops the way that you then think about the world and your outlook on design. And that hippie upbringing, even when back in the UK, being brought up with carpets and Indian artifacts all around me, I think that that's kind of imbued in you as you're growing up, and that has then come out in what I've done later.
Thank you, Flora. And Ellis, the same question to you. I mean, a far cry maybe from India, but nonetheless really influenced by an environment. Could you tell us how that has affected the collections that you made?
Sure. So I totally agree with Flora when she says that where you grew up and the experiences you have when you're younger, they hugely influence you and the way you kind of think about the world. I grew up on the west coast of Scotland, in a small village called Benderloch, and it massively impacted all the work that I make just now, even although obviously at the time as a child you're not even remotely thinking about what you might do when you're grown up. But I grew up right beside the beach, lots of really beautiful eroded mountains, and the seascape there is very rocky. Lots of natural erosion and really beautiful medieval architectural buildings. Castles are literally everywhere in the area that I'm in, but in a very sort of primal way. There's, old decorative details are sort of eroded and barely visible in some areas, and then it's very intricate and detailed in other parts of those buildings. And I think similar to Flora in the way that we were kind of left to explore. My parents and my grandparents used to always take me down to the beach, or we'd be walking up the mountains nearby where we lived, and there's just so much to see. Like, I was really lucky growing up in such a beautiful place, and being around lots of unusual old buildings and even medieval hoards and objects that had been found on our land. My grandparents owned a farm, and every so often we would have metal detectorists turn up and say, this is supposed to be a prime spot. Can we come and have a look and see what we can find? And as a kid, that's really exciting that somebody wants to come and search for treasure on your doorstep. And that's something that really stayed with me 100%. And I kept coming back to, like Flora says, all through my sort of design process. It's something that keeps sort of bringing more and more inspiration.
It's really interesting, isn't it, how our jewellery can be sort of capture memories and sensations, and then both of you are capturing your own, but you're also making things for other people to imbue with their own memories and connect. So what you're describing, both of you, is very kind of visceral, and you sort of puts you in certain places. So although you both are influenced by your upbringings, your work itself is actually really very different. I guess the locations you're inspired by are very different. So coming to you first this time, Ellis, could you tell us a bit about the different techniques you use in your work, and maybe if there is any overlap with what Flora does, but how do you make your jewellery?
So I've got some pieces here that I'm going to hold up to the screen, and hopefully you'll at least be able to see some of it. So for instance, these pieces here, everything I make, I hand carve in wax first, which I know is something that I do have in common with Flora, because she makes a lot of models first. But I hand carve everything in wax, and then I set it with diamonds afterwards. A lot of the stones that I use, they're all natural coloured diamonds, so it's very much inspired by that seascape and sort of the sun setting and the colours that you get in the heather and the moors and that sort of thing. I know we both use diamonds in our work as well, but quite often unusual colours or interesting cuts. And we both do a lot of drawing, at least in the first sort of stages of things, trying to figure out how something's going to look. But for me, I'm not sure how it is with Flora, possibly the same thing. It's not until you start working in 3D that you really understand how a piece is going to come together, which is why, making in waxes and model making, everything that you see that eventually will look like a ring first starts off as a wax model. So it's something that I will carve to understand the proportions, to see how a stone will be set or how it will fit first, and then transforming it into gold is when it kind of starts to come together and sort of bring it to life.
And so the stones that you're working with, you said they're unusual in colour and they look really beautiful, so those colours you've just shown us. When you're designing, are you designing around a sort of natural shape of a stone, or would you have your stones cut to suit the models and the designs that you've developed?
So I usually, it can be a bit of a mixture, but normally I have a stone already that I've come across a really beautiful diamond that I know I want to be the centerpiece of that design. Sometimes it's things that are quite simple, like this particular diamond, although you can't see it as clearly on here, this is one of the pieces that we will have for Goldsmiths Fair. It's this lovely sort of orangey reddish tone, and I just wanted a really simple, elegant setting for it to just kind of show off the stone itself. So yeah, a lot of the time I am led by finding a particular diamond, but then equally sometimes people bring me stones and diamonds to work with, so there's that as well. There's so many different ways that I work in that respect.
So coming to you, Flora, with the same question, could you tell us a bit about the different techniques you use in your work? And it's interesting to continue that dialogue around the overlaps with what Ellis does.
Yeah, I mean, similarly to Ellis, I think both of us have a training from St Martin's, which means that you always start with a sketchbook and you start with a lot of drawing. So developing your ideas happens on paper. And then once you get to a stage where you like an idea, you then take that and start to work it up in models. And both Ellis and me use wax for our model making. I've got an example of something that I've been doing recently, which is quite a simple design, but it shows, so you can see that's the final piece, and that was the carving that I made to understand exactly how the design would work. So the wax shows the sculptural quality, and then it's scaled down to a quite simple pendant, but you can really see the detail in how that is going to then work. So yeah, I develop the ideas, and it's little things like the angle of a particular ridge. A lot of my work has ridges and is carved into in some way, and that comes from drawing and then developing in wax. But likewise, because I love carving so much, I use quite a lot of carved stone, and that comes again, that love of carved stone comes from my interest in India and the aesthetic that I take from that. And I've got a piece here, which is one of my earlier pieces, which is the Jayamiti ring, which is carved to my models. So each of those stones are hand carved to match a model that I originally carved in wax. And I think the reason I love carved stone so much, it goes right back to my experiences in India. And the first piece of jewellery that I was given there was a little carved carnelian bird from an archaeological site in Taxila, and that's always stuck with me because it was my early childhood experience of jewellery, and it carries through into your later life. So yeah, carving in wax. I use stones that I find and that I sourced and that I particularly love, as well as carved stone. So it depends often on the colour combinations that I want to use in the work, and the design itself, and what I'm trying to achieve with the design, how I will finally make the piece. But yeah, a combination of all of those factors go into the development of the design.
It's interesting that there's quite a sort of stark difference between Scotland and in India, but you still both have this real affinity with colour. That's something when I see both of your works, the use and interpretation of colour is so interesting and exciting.
It's interesting, actually, the differences in the colour as well.
Yes, absolutely. You're not using the same colours, but you're both interested in colour in a way that betrays your formative years. You both studied, I think, as you mentioned, Flora, at Central St Martin's. What led you to go there to study? What drew you to Central St Martin's, Flora?
Well, I had left a job as the director of Electrum Gallery, which was a gallery on South Moulton Street that showed contemporary jewellery, and I'd had kids, and they'd got to an age where I felt that I could probably go and do something else. And so I was looking around for a way to get back to making, and I decided that the best way of doing that was to go and reinvigorate myself and think about the way that I approach my work. And that was the platform that an MA at St Martin's gave me, was to go away and really consider what I was doing and why. And it was certainly a rigorous training. But yeah, it did enable me to then have the confidence to take the next step and to set up alone, which I hadn't managed to do until that point. I'd worked for other people in the jewellery industry for a long time, but I'd never made that break.
And Ellis, how about you? I presumably you weren't there at the same time, but you did the same course, is that right? And what drew you to St Martin's?
So Flora was actually very helpful to me when I was doing my master's course. I actually looked at Flora's work and interviewed her for my MA, because I think, Flora, had you done it 2 years before me?
Yeah, because I'd gone back to college as a older person. So yeah, I'd done it a couple of years ahead, possibly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I obviously have a slightly different background. I studied for my bachelor's in jewellery and silversmithing at the Glasgow School of Art. That was my first sort of foray into jewellery. Before starting there, I'd always known that I wanted to do something creative. I was definitely more towards that than, say, the academic side of things. But I didn't quite know what I wanted to do yet. So before I'd started the bachelor's, I did a portfolio preparation course at Cardonald's in Glasgow, which is basically where you get to try a little bit of everything. It was so useful and so helpful. I had an amazing tutor there called Ellis in Scott, who really helped me develop my ideas. And there was something in jewellery that meant you still got to do a little bit of everything. So you could still paint and you could still sketch and you could take photos of things. And then I really liked the idea that you could translate it into something that other people would wear, that, you know, could bring, you know, joy to them as well as something that was bringing joy to you. So I went and did my BA at Glasgow, which was really incredible, especially from a technical viewpoint. We had amazing tutors, Helen Marriott, Andrew Lamb, Anna Gordon, Jonathan Boyd, and the technicians there, Shona Guthrie and Nigel Monroe, were just incredible. So we would spend a lot of time coming to them with impossible questions, and they would help us from the technical point of view. And a lot of concept, maybe slightly more towards art jewellery in the BA. And then when I finished the BA, I stayed on as an artist in residence, where you teach there a couple of days a week in exchange for studio space, and basically tried to figure out what I wanted to do next. And then I came across the master's programme at St Martin's. And what I really liked about it was very creative, but it also helped you visualize how you could take your jewelry into more of a business. Sometimes in art schools, turning things into a business is a bit of a, not a dirty word, but it's not as, you know, you're not supposed to think about being commercial yet. But the way that it was approached in the MA was a really good balance of design development, and really thinking about, you know, where you want to sell your work, what kind of business you want to become, you know, who your jewellery's for. And as Flora said, it's very rigorous. It's quite a learning curve. The tutors there are incredible. Simon Fraser, Elizabeth Wright, Melanie Eddy, all amazing and very skilled in different ways, but lots of sleepless nights and redesigning things. But it was a great place to grow the business that you wanted to create and really explore design development. And I'm sure, Flora, you'd agree, it really helps you visualize how to take things forward.
Yeah, I do agree. And I think one of the reasons why you and me probably have gone down a similar designer maker field, it was because we both had done BAs in jewellery in our past before we came to St Martin's, and that enabled us to have the making skills. I did mine at Medway. I was taught by Brian Hill, who now runs the awards, and that background in making was really helpful to then take it further in design at St Martin's. So it gave us a good grounding, I think.
Yes, and it's interesting that obviously then you've both come together. You're part of the Goldsmiths Centre, which is, and have engaged with the centre in various different ways over the last few years, and it's is that journey continues, doesn't it? So coming onto the materials and the way you work now, sustainability is something that is really important to consider, and consumers are increasingly interested in where and how materials are sourced. Could you tell me a little bit about that your approach to running a sustainable practice? Would you like to start with that one, Flora?
Well, I now only use recycled gold, so everything that we make is recycled gold. And I also source my coloured stones as traceably as I can. They're almost all from mines that we know where they've come from originally. And I use also Canada mark diamonds, often in pieces, particularly pieces that are higher end pieces, because they warrant the use of Canada mark diamonds. And I am also trying at the moment to review all of the packaging that we use. I've got a backlog of old packaging, but I'm actually taking it right through into the rest of the company at the moment, so that we can use only recycled materials or sustainable materials in our packaging too. And we also offer fair trade gold if any of our clients want it. We don't use it as standard, but we do offer it as something for commissions if people would like it.
And how about you, Ellis? How have you approached this area within your practice?
So I would say it's similar to Flora. One thing that I feel is quite important is, obviously we're working in gold and diamonds, so it's never going to be 100% the most ethical thing, because you are still mining into the ground. But I think it's about being as sort of traceable and as accountable as you can be within the field. I think it was maybe last year's issue of Vanity Fair and Jewellery, Annabel Davidson put it really well. She was talking about just being accountable for what we do, and knowing your process, and knowing the people that you work with, and just having that kind of traceability, so that if a client was to ask you, where does this come, where does that come from, you can tell them. So similar to Flora, I work in recycled gold and traceable diamonds. I work with GIA diamonds on request, but quite a lot of my diamonds, because they're natural colours or sort of unusual coloured diamonds, they don't tend to come with GIA certificates, but it is something that I do offer. Similar to Flora, also registered as a fair trade gold ambassador and supplier, so any of my pieces can be made in fair trade gold. And I work with a few very small diamond suppliers who can trace, they can tell me exactly where certain pieces have come from. So that's really important to know and be able to pass on. And I think it's just like Flora said, breaking it down into every part of the business. Everything's handmade in London. I outsource the casting to a UK company, but everything else is kind of made and finished by myself. So I am lucky that I've got that ability to control everything as a smaller business. And again, with the packaging, it's all recycled. I think it's the small steps you can take. You don't need to do everything at once. I think people often panic and think, oh, I've got to change everything quickly, and then they can't do all of it, so they don't do anything. But it's just taking little bits, bit by bit, and knowing where you're not as good and where you need to improve, and just being honest about it, really.
Yes, I think that holistic approach is really important. And you've both alluded to the fact that you will respond to your customers in terms of if they like you to work with Fairtrade Gold or in that way, which brings us on to the topic of commissions. And you both make what you would describe as heirloom jewellery, so jewellery for the future. And could you tell us a bit about a recent commission that you have made? Flora, do you want to start with your...
Yeah, well, I recently made a dome ring, one of my dome rings, which was based on this design. I don't have it here because it's gone to the client, but I do have an example of the design that they particularly liked. And they had been left a single earring from their grandmother's possessions, which had a beautiful elongated long ruby, and we reset that and used the gold from that and matched the Russian alloy, so it was a slightly pinker gold than we would normally use here, and set that into a new dome ring, which you can see on my website, but I can't show you. But it was a nice commission because the stone was absolutely beautiful, and because it was antique, it was probably better than you would have been able to find today, and really gorgeous colour. And yeah, very successful commission, given that it was a single earring and not really much use to anybody.
Sounds like a wonderful way of reimagining the metal in that way. Do you enjoy working to commission? Is that something?
I do, actually. I enjoy the parameters that it gives you, because you often you're reworking the metal and the stones, so you know exactly what the metal and the stones are that you're going to use. That defines things straight away, so it kind of closes down some of the design parameters for you. But I also just love meeting the clients and getting to understand what they want and what it's for, why they want to make the commission, and trying to fulfill their dreams.
Yes. Well, that sounds wonderful. We all have to have a look at your website and see how that wonderful be imagined. So, Ellis, how about you? Would you like to share a recent commission with us?
Sure. So I've got a piece here that's in progress at the moment. So I did touch on it earlier. This ring is going to be set with this sapphire, which originally came out of this early 1900s ring. It had 2 diamonds on either side, which we're going to use for a future piece. I don't know if that's going to be maybe a set of earrings, or we might turn it into another ring and perhaps the pendant. But although, this was lovely and, beautiful inherited piece, it just wasn't something that was getting worn. It was stored in a box and sort of taken out and looked at every so often and kind of, oh, I should wear that. But even just because it is an antique piece, the claws had kind of worn down, and it was just, they got to the stage where they're just a bit afraid of wearing it even. And their style is definitely a bit more sort of chunky. It's not your traditional ring aesthetic that you would wear. So we're actually going for a much larger band. It's about 8mm, very similar to the size of this ring that I have here. And again, quite a simple setting. And we're reusing some of the gold that's here, as well as adding some new gold to it to alloy it together. And early stages so far, but very happy as we go. And I think it's one of those things that clients, and I'm sure this is something Flora finds as well, they really enjoy the fact that something that's been sat in a box or in a drawer is finally going to have new life. They like seeing the pictures of it in process, you know, when it's being melted down and, you know, alloyed with other metals to turn it into a new piece, and, you know, becoming something that they can finally wear. And knowing that the gold that's in it is gold that has, you know, been worn by perhaps a great aunt or a grandmother or someone that's passing it down through the generations, or, you know, the stone or the diamond is something that someone they are related to or their partner's related to has worn and loved and enjoyed. And I think that's just really special, to be trusted to work on, you know, these beautiful commissions. It's really quite humbling, some of the stories that people come with. I've done a lot of one couple had both been married before, and then both of their partners had passed away, and they'd found each other later in life. So we used the gold from both of their previous wedding rings and turned it into their wedding rings. And it's such a nice way to re-envisage gold, so that it's not, you know, left sitting in a box unworn.
You both evoke a sense of these beautiful stories, these beautiful journeys you go on with both the materials and also the people. So I've mentioned already that you're both showing in Goldsmiths Fair. A little bit different this year. It's not quite how any of us expected, in so much as our parameters and the COVID situation has made it prudent for it to go digital. How, from your perspective, do you feel about this change? What and how will you be showcasing your pieces? What have you sort of learned in preparing for such a different type of fair? Do you want to kick us off with that, Flora?
Yeah, well, I feel it's a great opportunity because it enables us to take the fair out to a totally different market, and it opens it up in many ways, and totally opens it up internationally as well to people who wouldn't have been able to come to a physical fair. So that's a real positive side to it. And in terms of how we've prepared for it, my daughter has made a film describing how I make my work and just talking a little bit more about the background to the work. So hopefully that helps to impart to people how we work and a little bit more about us. And then we've also got a section on our website. So there's a section which identifies which identifies all of the Goldsmiths Fair pieces, so that people can directly see how they connect to the rest of the work. But yeah, I mean, I suppose also doing things like this, we're doing interviews and we're preparing digitally for the new way.
Yes. There's a real silver lining, I think, to what is obviously a very challenging situation in many ways, is learning all these new skills, isn't it, and being able to do all these new things. And I certainly, having seen the film that you mentioned, Flora, that gives a wonderful insight into the space where you work and how you approach it, and you get the sort of sights and sounds of what and where you do that. And I think that that's an insight that you wouldn't necessarily get within the fair itself. So that's a real bonus.
Yeah.
Ellis, how about you? How have you approached this of it being a digital fair?
I mean, similar to Flora, a lot of preparation. We were definitely having to prepare quite a lot to think about not only the pieces, but how to convey them in the best way possible, so that you really felt as if you were there, looking at them, touching them. A lot of video, and a lot of high-res images that I've been uploading onto my own website, because, like Flora, I have a website with the shop, an e-commerce website. Everything will be clickable through from the fair, so that you can see all the range of pieces in amongst the rest of the work. It is quite difficult to choose 8 pieces that really embody the entirety of your work. So I think I've done quite a good job, hopefully, of showcasing my work in the range of different pieces that I offer. But yeah, just a lot of preparing, a lot of mentioning things on Instagram, mailing out to my clients, reminding them that it's happening. And like Flora said, it is an opportunity, a massive opportunity to show this worldwide. Normally, it would be you have to come to London and you have to physically see the show. And I have quite a lot of clients in America and in Australia. So they're actually quite excited that they're going to be able to have the same experience as people in London. And I'm setting up Zoom appointments. Some people who are in London or nearby have expressed the desire to come for one-on-one appointments at the studio, which I'm holding throughout the fair. And yeah, it's a really exciting opportunity. And just a massive thanks to Hugh and Harriet for all the hard work they've been doing, pulling everything together for the fair. But I think it's going to be really good. I'm really excited.
so am I as a visitor. It's a whole new experience, and it is really exciting. So you both talked about how difficult it is to hone it down to those 8 pieces. So I'm going to challenge you even more now and ask you if there is a piece that you prepared for the fair which you are especially proud of. Ellis, for you, which one would you pick from your collection?
So difficult to choose, like you said, but one piece that I spent a lot of time working on was this shield ring, which you can't see beautifully here, but you can see on the website in clearer detail. This is a slightly larger, chunkier version of the shield rings that I already offer. It's a style that I've been asked to make to commission before, and then I thought for the fair, why not roll out a sort of one-of-a-kind edition of it with a really nice orange diamond in the centre, and then lots of little diamonds set around the outside. This piece is, despite being very chunky, extremely wearable, incredibly comfortable. That's something that I feel is really important in jewellery, as even if it's a statement piece or something quite large scale, you want it to be soft on the inside. You want to feel comfortable and confident wearing it. All of my pieces, I want you to be able to wear all the time, every day, as much as possible. The reason why I work in gold and diamonds is because of their strength, their durability. I'm quite a clumsy person, so I'm quite a good wear test for all of my jewellery as well. And this is just one of the pieces that I will be showing at the fair that kind of exemplifies my work in the sort of erosive signature style that I have. So yeah, that's this one here.
It's certainly a beauty. How about you, Flora? What's your top pick?
I think the piece that I would choose is this going a bit close there. I don't know if you can see it, but it's tourmaline and a hexagon diamond. And the reason I've chosen it is because it's probably the launch pad for a slightly new direction for me. I'm working in still sculptural, but slightly smaller scale pieces with precious stones. These tourmalines were cut specifically for the design so that I could get the colours that I want. So the colour in these one-of-a-kind pieces that I've done for the fair is quite important to me. There's a range of soft pinks and greens, which is a slightly new direction for me. And they're all one of a kind, and I used a lot of tourmaline in those pieces as well, because it's the right kind of colour, the colour that I wanted to achieve. So the colour combinations in those new pieces and the textures in those new pieces are definitely kind of defining a new direction for me.
Exciting. 2 beautiful rings. So Flora, you've obviously had the experience of being in Goldsmiths Fair a few times. Ellis, this is your first foray. Flora, what advice would you be passing on to Ellis at this point in time?
I find this really hard because all of my usual advice that I would give, like drinking lots of water and wearing sensible shoes, is kind of thrown out of the window because it's digital. So I would turn this around and say, Ellis, you're probably far more equipped to do a digital fair than me, given your youth. So you probably have advice for me in terms of how to deliver the digital side of things. But I think you've touched on some of it in the sense that offering a physical option for people is quite important. So both of us are offering the possibility to meet with us at the Goldsmiths Centre, or to have Zoom calls with us in addition, so that people can have a more of a personal connection with us alongside the fair. And I think that's probably one of the key things that I think is important for this year. But yeah, Ellis, any tips?
I mean, I do love using Instagram, and I think it is an opportunity this year to open up to a slightly different market who might not have visited the fair. I make a lot of alternative engagement rings, as I know you do, so that slightly younger market, I think, is quite interested. I've had quite a few of my followers going, I didn't know about this is great, I would have loved to have visited it before, but I just didn't know that Goldsmiths Fair existed, because in their pocket they just weren't aware of it yet. So I think that'll be really interesting, seeing sort of a younger generation of people who know they want interesting jewellery but just haven't known or haven't come across it before. And yeah, just social media, lots of videos, and like you said, making appointments when we can, and yeah, just being open and excited to show our work, really.
I'm sure it still pays to wear comfortable shoes and drink lots of water.
Absolutely,
even if you are behind the camera. I think both of those things are good rules for life. Thank you both for sharing so much of your practice and your inspirations and your preparations for Goldsmiths Fair. I wish you huge amounts of luck with it. Have a fabulous fair. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thank you.